you matter more than you are matter. There's something going on there.
There's something going on with all of us.
Yeah.
We kind of know it, we don't know it. But it's just, you can't measure it and you can't put it on a scale. And so people don't like that.
Yeah.
They don't like that. It makes them feel dumb to believe in that. It makes them feel dumb to even speculate, to even just say, what do you think happens when you die? Like even that conversation is like, people don't like that. Nothing. It goes dark and that's it. It's over. That's it. You die. Like, how do you know? Have you died? Like, you don't know.
In all of this, what do you think of Jesus?
Joe Rogan's answer to that question and his response to everything that Wes said is something that almost everyone on this earth will be intrigued by.
It's such a complex and fascinating subject. It really is. And it takes someone like you to really because it's like real easy to lean into the fun stuff. It's real easy to lean into the Anunnaki stuff, but the actual real we know is 100% the accounts of people that lived back then.
Yeah.
That to me is as fascinating, if not more, than even we were made by aliens. Like all of it is bizarre. And the fact that we're still going over these texts thousands of years later is also fascinating.
Yeah. And lots of this stuff, like the onomastic congruence, is something that has really only been studied to the level that it has within the last 50 years.
Wow.
So we're constantly discovering ways that we can use different types of methodological analysis to figure out the historical validity of something. So this is, we call it verisimilitude, which is historians are looking for what can show us the appearance, likelihood, and probability of something being true. And so sometimes documents out themselves as being unreliable and not true because they inadvertently include these clues. Like, so the Gospel of Barnabas, which I mentioned before, which Billy Carson has brought up as an evidence that he sees as denying the crucifixion, it talks about Jesus getting in a boat and traveling to Nazareth. But Nazareth is landlocked. So that person clearly did not know anything about the geography of first century Israel, because you're not getting in a boat to go to Nazareth, right? But if you're writing, in the case of the Gospel of Barnabas, you're talking about 1,000+ years later. But if you've never been there and you don't understand, it's like, have you ever seen Middle-age paintings of lions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They had no idea what they were.
Well, we brought that up the other day because I was in Ravello.
Okay.
And there's a church, an ancient church in Ravello, and it has a depiction of the whale. And the whale doesn't look anything like a whale. It has wings. It looks like a lion's head. It's so weird.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the Middle Ages, throughout the Middle Ages.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
I mean, it looks like a dragon.
Yeah, yeah.
Crazy.
Well, and lions look a lot like dogs because they're like, what's your frame of reference?
Right.
So,
and also you're getting someone describing it to an artist.
Yeah.
You probably can't paint it.
Yeah.
So you have to describe it.
Yeah. It's like
yeah, that's what it looks like.
Yeah. Tertiary, secondary. So, and a lot of these writings kind of out themselves as that literarily within the things that they choose to include. Names are a small example, but geography or distances between places, the biblical gospels describe going up to Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And we can kind of read that and not think anything about it. But Jerusalem, on the elevation of sea level, you do go up to it. And so it's like these small clues that we as historians are looking for. Or on the parable of the Good Samaritan, it's going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. And you go down like an elevation in sea level to go to Jericho.
As someone who was just in Israel this year, I can testify that what Wes is saying here is completely accurate.
The story of Zacchaeus, who's the guy who climbs a tree to see Jesus. He's a wee little man. He's he's short and he can't see over the crowd. And he hears this miracle worker, Jesus is coming. So he climbs a sycamore tree. And the Gospels specifically say he climbs a sycamore tree. Well, this can be like a detail we can pass over, but we know based on kind of the acidity of the soils that sycamore trees only grow in those areas in that, time frame. So we can look and see, okay, well, whoever Luke is getting this from, he's adding this detail. Maybe he's not even aware of the significance of it, but whoever he's getting this from has been there because they actually know what tree would have been growing there and tell him that Zacchaeus climbs a sycamore tree. And so it's like fauna and flora and distance between locations, things that actually other ancient writers get wrong sometimes.
Have you ever had a debate with a snarky atheist?
Yeah.
I think that would be
fun. Like a formal debate?
No, not even a formal debate. I think it would be a fascinating conversation because I'm sure, atheists, they vary just like Christians vary. But the worst versions of them are essentially believers in the religion of atheism.
Right.
They worship the concept of there being no God, and this is it. When you die, nothing happens.
Yeah.
And that to me is always so arrogant. Just the fact that you exist at all is so bizarre and so spectacular. The idea that for sure that when the lights shut out, that's a wrap, because there's no evidence of the contrary. Well, okay. But
Kind of assuming your conclusion there.
absence of evidence is not evidence. It's especially when you're talking about something that's as bizarre as death.
Here's where Joe Rogan really starts going in on the truth of the religion of atheism. It's where they claim to not worship any god at all, but really it's the god of their own understanding.
And especially when you have people that have near-death experiences that are radically similar.
Yeah.
Those are really weird. They're really weird how many similarities people have in these near-death experiences from accidents and all sorts of things that people, come back from, where their heart stops beating, they see themselves above their body. There's a lot of weirdness to it that makes you, I just think it's a little silly, because how could you know what you don't know?
As someone who was actually in a coma for 18 days 3 years ago with a skull cracked in half and doctors who were talking about me in past tense, I actually can say that I was in an NDE, and it wasn't just a really weird situation. It wasn't just a really weird experience. It was a real experience, an experience that goes beyond the explanation of what any atheist could ever even attempt to give.
Yeah.
You cannot know what you don't know. And the problem is that there's a cachet, that there's a social credit amongst academics in particular that's ascribed to a person who is atheist, a person who he's brilliant, he's not silly, he doesn't believe in myths, I get it. I get why there's social pressure in that regard. I get it. But to not look at the universe itself, just this creation engine of planets and stellar nurseries, just the bizarreness of the epicness of it all, and to not wonder if maybe you have a very narrow perception of what this whole thing is all about.
Yeah. Deny the virgin birth, but not the virgin birth of the universe.
Yeah. Well, all of it, like everything, just the big. There's so many more impressive miracles than any of the things that people think of in the Bible. It's just they're so weird in our day and age that we're not willing to, like, if we want to think that things are very clean and easy to measure, and they often are not. And I think most of what it means to be a human being in a meaningful way is not measurable. Most of it, love and friendship and community, these things are not very measurable. They're very strange. The bond that people have with their family and their loved ones, and it's very strange.
Yeah.
That love connection, whatever love is, whatever good is, it's a very real thing, and it seems to not exist, certainly not in the volume in other animals that exist in us. There's obviously nurturing in other animals. They nurture their loved ones, but their perception of life and death and all of it is very different than ours. So it leads me to why? Why is our version of life so much more rich and complicated than any other being that exists? And why do we have this insatiable desire to learn and know more?
Yeah.
What is it?
Why does this, however many 3 pounds of gray matter in my brain, why is that able to plummet the intricacies of the universe? Right. Like, and I think that's ultimately the questions that we should be asking, in terms of, you matter more than you are matter. There's something going on there.
There's something going on with all of us.
Yeah.
We kind of know it and we don't know it. But it's just, you can't measure it and you can't put it on a scale, and so people don't like that.
Yeah.
They don't like that. It makes them feel dumb to believe in that. It makes them feel dumb to even speculate, to even just say, what do you think happens when you die? Like, even that conversation is like, people don't like that. Nothing. It goes dark and that's it. It's over. That's it. You die. Like, how do you know? Have you died? Like, you don't know.
In all of this, what do you think of Jesus? Like, in terms of your own, like, journeying and trying to find answers to ultimate questions. What do you think of the historical person of Jesus?
Well, it certainly seems like there's a lot of people that believe that there was this very exceptional human being that existed. So the question is, what does that mean? Does it mean he was the Son of God? Does it mean he was just some completely unique human being that had this vision of humanity and this way of educating people and spreading this ideology that would ultimately change the way human beings interact with each other forever? So what is he the Son of God? Well, are we all? That's another question, right? Do we all have that inside of us? Do we all have that ability to change everything around us inside of us? Do we all have that unique connection to the divine? And is he a representation of the best version of that? Or was he an actual person that was the Son of God? And is it important?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, what does it mean? It's just the fact that it's a question to ponder is a miracle in itself, in a way. Just the fact that there's this concept of this person that died for our sins, that's the Son of God, but you have to you have to believe in a bunch of stuff to go that way. Like, just the concept of that is interesting to people, because what it can do to people is offer them a very unique way to change the way they feel about the world itself. And if you do follow that, I know a lot of Christians are hardcore Christians. They're some of the nicest people you'll ever meet in your life. So it does work. Right? Like if you do live like a Christian and you do follow the principles of Christ, you will have a richer, more love-filled life. So it is true, right? But you have to submit to this concept that this guy was the child of God who came down to earth, let himself be crucified, came back from the dead, explained a bunch of stuff for people, and then said, all right, see you when I come back.
And you don't know how you can wrap your head around
Right.
that.
The very life of Christ will change you from the inside out.
Here's the thing. If he came back, who the believe him today? With all the fake news and all the CGI and AI, like imagine, that would be the most bizarre thing of all time. If we get to a point where artificial reality is indiscernible from regular reality and Jesus chooses to come back at that moment, boy, that's the ultimate test of faith, right? When it's impossible to discern. If we really reach a point where virtual reality is indistinguishable from regular reality, which
Right.
we're probably 100 years away from that or something, like how far, maybe not even that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's probably why Jesus came in the 1st century and not the 21st century.
But imagine if that's the big catch. Like Jesus does return, but when he returns, we're just so confused that we can't even tell.
Yeah.
Or maybe that's how he returns in the first place. Maybe he returns through AI.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the portal to Jesus.
I don't know anything about that. Yeah, I mean,
That scares the shit out of me.
I really appreciate, guys that you're friends with, right? Like the Jordan Petersons and the Douglas Murrays of the world, or, the Tom Hollands, not the Spider-Man actor, the historian, who talk about this stuff. I think I really like the way that Jordan Peterson articulates it, but I think he misses the forest for the trees.
How so?
In that he sees Jesus as an archetype. And I don't think actually even Jesus gives you the opportunity to see him as the archetype. Because I have this love-hate relationship with all of Peterson's stuff, because he seems to get so much right where he walks up to the line, but he doesn't want to cross over.
And is the crossover, you think, connected to a life in academia? Or
No.
What do you think it is?
I wonder, and I'd love to talk to him about this, like how do you remedy this issue that, because he seems to think that the concept of Jesus as an example is more important than the actual flesh and blood 1st century itinerant Jewish preacher who was crucified and rose from the dead physically, which is the claim of the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament. That's an example for us to look on and live by. But I actually think that Jesus condemns moralism. And ultimately what I see Peterson doing is looking at Jesus as a moral example. And if Jesus is nothing but a moral example, then you can save yourself and you don't actually need a savior. And so I think actually Jesus would have critiqued that, because Jesus was very against moralism.
And how do you define Jesus being against moralism? Like, what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, Jesus looks at the religiosity of his day with like particular groups like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who are these other groups of Jews during his day. So we talked about the Essenes, who actually aren't mentioned in the Bible, but there are other groups like the Pharisees, who are like lay scholars, and the Sadducees, who are professional priest scholars. And he's constantly critiquing the fact that they have this hypocritical religiosity to them, where they're doing things like tithing their mint leaves, like to make sure that they get all of, this is where we get the idea of the letter of the law versus the intention of the law. Like Jesus critiques them for that, because he says, you're trying to do everything right and you're missing the point. So one of the things he says is like, if your donkey falls in a ravine on the Sabbath, do you pull it out? Or does that work? Like, what's the point of the Sabbath? Is it to not do any work? Like, is it to make sure that you're not working too hard because you might be breaking the Sabbath? Or like, what is the point? He says, like, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And that there's this intention. This is the whole Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, is he keeps saying, you have heard it said, but I say, and he refers to the Mosaic law. And it looks like he's critiquing the Mosaic law, but he's not actually. He's getting back to the intention of the law. So when he says, you have heard it said, do not commit murder, but I say to you, anybody who harbors a hate for their brother in their heart has already committed murder. And what he's getting to is like, what's the intention? What's the meaning of the law that God gives to you? Because the law is like a mirror. It shows you how dirty you are. But his critique is, he's like, you guys are trying to clean yourself with a mirror. That's stupid. It's just if anything, it's gonna make you more messy. Like, get in the shower. The law is not what cleans you. The law is what reveals that you're dirty. And so in that sense, I think, if Jesus is a moral example, it actually misses what I think Jesus actually said about what his purpose was, in that you can't do enough to actually live up to the standard that God holds you to. And so if you keep striving, you're actually going to wear yourself out and be exhausted.
Like atheists.
I didn't say you did, Joe.
A lot of them go crazy. They go crazy when they get older.
Yeah.
Yeah. Listen, Wes, this is such an awesome conversation, and I'm sad that it went down the way it went down with you and Billy, but the good thing out of it is that a lot of people became aware of your work, and it's such exhaustive work. It's really amazing what you've done.
Well, if you've been following Joe for any time now, you're not surprised at all at the way he handled this interview, and it's quite obvious that his faith has only grown. What I loved about this interview that Joe Rogan had with Wesley Huff, that most people actually are still seeing the full scope of, is the truth of how faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, which means there's a lot of things that you can't fully put into the box of logic and into the understanding that you are seeking. Like, explain to me the love you have for your wife. Explain to me the feeling a father has for his son when he holds him in his arms. Explain to me the scientific reason that we even care for one another, right? There's so many variables to this universe that you can't put within the scope of a certain educational understanding. Instead, it actually takes faith. It takes a humility where it says that you're not going to be manipulated and swayed with the wind and the waves of a cult or a fairy tale, but instead, actually, you're going to humble yourself enough to believe that maybe you don't know it all, to just believe that maybe trying to be good on your own isn't going to work. And one day there's going to come a day where you finally die and you'll see the truth like never before. And if you're actually like me, like 3 years ago, I actually went right on the brink of life and death when my skull was cracked in half. The doctors were talking about me in past tense, in asking what I was like, calling in my parents, even asking if I had written a last will. I had no hope. In fact, they said that I was either going to never wake up again, or if I did wake up, I would be a mental vegetable and that I would truly never exist like I did before. But 18 days into the coma, the Spirit of the Lord brought me back to life, and I miraculously recovered, went out of the hospital, and to this day, it has been a living, walking testimony. Even the breath in my lungs is a testimony to the mercy of God. And let me tell you, though, the Jesus I encountered, he's not a religion that you check a million boxes for. He's not a letter of law that you have to qualify yourself for, but instead, he's love. And he's not just a fairy tale love. He's not the love that the woke mafia will present to you. No, he's a love that is real.